Michael Ballack is probably one of the best midfielders of his generation. He captained his national side for many years, but why is he seen as maybe the most unluckiest footballer to ever play the game? So a quick background on his career. He started in Chemnitz in 1995, where he played there for 2 years, and then he eventually got a move to FC Kaiserslautern. Made 16 appearances for Kaiserslautern after they made history being the first team newly promoted to then win the Bundesliga. And then the following season he was one of the star players when they got to the Champions League quarterfinals but were eliminated by Bayern Munich. This is where Ballack broke out when he joined Bayer Leverkusen in 1999 for roughly about 4.1 million euros. But we'll start in 1999-2000, where his bad luck started at Leverkusen when they lost the title to Bayern Munich on the last day of the season, very similar to what Dortmund did against Munich last year. But in this game they only needed a draw to win the league. But unfortunately they lost to Unterhaching, where Ballack scored an own goal and they lost 2-0, which then gave Bayern Munich the title. But this happened. Dortmund did it last year against Bayern, like I said. Are they all the most unluckiest players in the world? No. But it was 2 seasons later where Leverkusen were trying for the title again, but lost out to Borussia Dortmund. Leverkusen gave away a 5-point league, winning 1 out of the last 4 games to gift Dortmund the trophy. However, this wasn't the only bad part about this season. If we all remember it, Leverkusen got to the Champions League final against the Real Madrid squad. We all remember that with the Zidane great goal where Roberto Carlos chipped it to him. And that Zidane goal was seen as maybe the best goal in Champions League history. And unfortunately it came against Leverkusen because in that game, Raul scored a very scruffy goal in the first few minutes, and then Lucio, the fantastic Brazilian centre-back, equalised, and then unfortunately Zidane scored, which gave Real Madrid the trophy. And in this game as well, I think they suffered like Liverpool did in 2022 against Thibaut Courtois, because Iker Casillas maybe had one of the best games of his career in this game. He was reaching his prime at this point, he was in his early mid-20s, and he was absolutely fantastic. And on another day, if they have another keeper in net, Bayer Leverkusen probably win that trophy. But it doesn't stop there, because they still had a chance in the DFB Pokal against Schalke. However, they lost 4-2 against them, which gave them no trophies out of all the free competitions that they could have won it in. But it doesn't stop there, because there was a little tournament in Japan that year called the World Cup. And unfortunately, there were a lot of good teams that tournament. You had the French team, who had won the World Cup 4 years prior, and the Euros. You had a good English team on that time. But despite Ballack being one of the best players in that tournament and leading him to win the UEFA 2002 midfielder of the season, they came up against that 2002 Brazilian team with Ronaldo, Ronaldinho and the rest of them lads. And sometimes, unfortunately, you just come against a team that are destined to win the trophy. Unfortunately, with the final, Ballack was suspended, so he didn't even get to play in the final. In another day, he might have helped them win it, and Germany would have come out successful in that. This was the first season when Ballack came runner-up in 4 major trophies, which might be seen in the future. In the summer of 2002, Michael Ballack joined Bayern Munich after very heavy interest for Real Madrid, and he joined the club for about 6 million euros, and he would go on to have a very successful spell here. He would win 3 Bundesligas, 3 DFB Pokals, and it was finally like he was getting the monkey off his back in German football. Even though he won a Bundesliga prior to that, he was able to have constant success. But despite the domestic success that Ballack would help bring to Bayern Munich, in Europe they did quite poor for the size of the club. They didn't even get past the quarterfinals once in Ballack's 4-year stay there. And even though this might not be seen as unlucky and is part of his making, club president Franz Beckenbauer criticised Ballack very heavily, saying that he was saving his strength for prospective employers after Ballack didn't play well in the DFB Pokal in 2006, and he was also accused of choking in very important Champions League games, which you never want to hear as a player. But then that takes us to the 2006 World Cup, where Germany were hosting it in their own backyard, and this seemed like Germany were destined to win this tournament. They were the home country, they had such a good team at that point, and Ballack was the captain and their marquee player. And they were having a good tournament until they came up against the Italians, where it took 119 minutes for Fabio Grosso to hit it into the bottom left corner and essentially win the game, but then also for Alessandro Del Piero to go down the left wing and hit it into the top right corner, one of the great goals of the recent World Cups. But they were 1 minute away from penalties, and if anyone knows how good the Germans are at penalties, I believe they've won 6 out of 7 in all major tournaments, which you'd back the chances, especially in a home crowd, and if they could just hold on for an extra minute or two, they might have got to the final, and I think they would have beat France that year. But in the summer of 2006, Michael Ballack joined Chelsea.
Oh, Ballack!
They were just coming off back-to-back title wins, and they were one of the best teams in the world at that point. So he slotted straight into their midfield, and I love this Chelsea team. They had captains everywhere in that team. They had John Obi Mikel, Michael Essien, Michael Ballack, Frank Lampard, John Terry. They were just all leaders of men in that squad, and it took them until Ballack's second season there, where Mourinho actually left in September and Avram Grant joined. Unfortunately, they ran up against a top quality Man United side when Ronaldo would eventually win the Ballon d'Or. But this is the second time in Ballack's career where he must be wondering, am I cursed? Because not only did they lose the title on the final day of the season when Manchester United won it away at Wigan and Chelsea drew against Bolton, but a few months before losing the title in February, they also lost the League Cup against rivals Tottenham. This was where Drogba and Berbatov scored in normal time, and then it took extra time for Jonathan Woodgate to score, which eventually won Spurs their last trophy in about 15 years. But that wasn't the end of it, because let's look back to May of 2008, where Chelsea would play in Russia in the Champions League final against who else but Man United, the team that they just lost the title to. And this was a great final. This could arguably be the peak of English football, especially in the modern era, because it maybe was the two best teams in the world going at each other. And they showed it when Ronaldo had a great header in the first half, Petr Cech was fantastic that game, and it took them to extra time and penalties, where Didier Drogba got sent off in extra time. However, this was somewhat out of Ballack's control, because one of the most iconic penalty misses in the history of the game really is when John Terry slips. Captain of Chelsea at the time, John Terry stood up to the penalty and he slipped and he hit the post, which is one of the worst misses in a final. But if you're Ballack and you're looking at this, you're thinking, I'm never going to win a Champions League ever. The German midfielder must have got flashbacks to 2002, losing against Real Madrid, and must have been thinking, I'm going to a national tournament now and we should be able to win it. They were a great side at that point, Germany. It was the Austria-Switzerland Euros at the time, and they had a good tournament despite having a shock defeat to Croatia in the early stages. They then played Portugal in the quarterfinals and he scored in that game to beat them 3-2. And then just beat Turkey in the semi-finals 3-2 again. But then who did they run up against? After losing to the Brazilian maybe best generation other than the 1970s, they ran up against undoubtedly Spain's best ever generation of the national team. And even though he had a calf injury, he still made it to play in the final. However, it was Fernando Torres' only goal to beat Germany 1-0 in that game, and unfortunately Ballack lost another major final. But he had still not won that major trophy with Germany. Ballack was slowly dwindling out. He had suffered with a few injuries at Chelsea, and he had won a Premier League under Carlo Ancelotti in 2010, and he had also won the FA Cup in 2010. But this was arguably Ballack's last year to win a major trophy with Germany, and that was in the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Ballack was on a good run of form going to that World Cup. He had scored 4 goals in the World Cup qualifiers. In the game against Portsmouth at Wembley in the FA Cup final, him and Kevin Prince Boateng were having some afters throughout the entire game, but Boateng slide tackled him, which put Ballack out of the entire World Cup, which is always devastating when a player basically loses a chance to go to their last major tournament. But Ballack did still travel with the squad, and he was trying to provide moral support, which apparently was helping. But he eventually left South Africa and left the squad because Philip Lahm, who took over captaincy from Michael Ballack, he said after the quarterfinals that he would not relinquish the captaincy back to Ballack, which at the time Oliver Bierhoff, the team manager, did criticise Philip Lahm's comments and did say Michael Ballack is still the captain, but Lahm's the captain of the World Cup. Fortunately, it's just unlucky with this because Germany actually had quite a good tournament. They had the very iconic win over England, even though that Frank Lampard goal definitely went in. They had emerging talents like Sami Khedira, Thomas Muller and Mesut Ozil, and apparently former German Ballon d'Or winner Lothar Matthäus suggested that Ballack might have let the younger players flourish by not being there. And unfortunately his relationship with the national team suffered because of this, after manager Joachim Löw apparently was waiting for Ballack to retire after the World Cup, but apparently Ballack just did not want to go out without fighting. The German Football Federation offered Ballack 2 more friendlies in the national team to get him to over 100 caps, which Ballack actually refused. And he claimed that Joachim Löw was disrespecting him after that injury in the FA Cup final, and even called those 2 friendly games an absolute farce. But I suppose let's answer the question, is Michael Ballack the most unluckiest footballer to ever play? And there are a lot of players who always came up second. However, Michael Ballack losing 4 major trophies in one season, not once but twice, is such a heartbreaking blow. But the fact that Ballack was still able to win trophies after that Leverkusen loss in 2002 and the Chelsea loss in 2008. He's one of the best German midfielders ever, for definite, and there's not many other players that can boast his resume. I'm sure he ended his career thinking that he could have won more because he was in touch and distance so many times, and unfortunately I think he is a player to suffer at the hands of different teams' golden generations. Maybe if he was in the Germany 2014 squad, well, he'd definitely starting in his prime, he'd probably been captain of that team. However, he played against the 2002 Brazilian squad, which is arguably the best national team ever to play the game. He played against the Spanish squads in 2008, which again was arguably the best national team to ever play the game. So sometimes it doesn't actually mean that you're not good enough, someone just might be better, and you can't argue with an R9 and Ronaldinho really, or a Fernando Torres, a David Villa, Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets. Sometimes you're just not better than them. But if you can leave a comment saying if Michael Ballack is the most unluckiest player of all time, or if there's a player unluckier than him, if you leave a like on the video, that'd be great, and if you could subscribe to the channel, that'd be really appreciated. But thanks for watching the video.